Hello, BookTube, and welcome to week 3 of Octolkien, an ongoing reading event that I'm doing with Justin at Ghost Reader and James Chatham, where we go through the signature works of the master, J.R.R. Tolkien. And my lot has fallen the Silmarillion, the long and sometimes, for a lot of people, impenetrable book telling the mythology and folklore, the prehistory of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. Basically, the fleshing out, the Bible of Tolkien's Legendarium. Tales of the single god, Iluvatar, who created everything, and the host of secondary gods, the Valar, who are his eyes and ears and his emissaries on the planet, on the world that the music of Eru Iluvatar creates. And in the first two installments that we saw here, we see right away that the Lucifer figure, the fallen Valar, Melkor, takes up abode on Middle-earth, on the world of Arda. And in a combination of stubbornness and jealousy and covetousness and just largely unexplained evil, amasses dark power to himself there, to an extent that the other Valar altogether often seem relatively evenly balanced with him, in a way that I don't really understand. He continuously ruins the plans of the other Valar, who want to make Arda a beautiful place, a welcoming and healing place, and yet they seldom take action to band together against him, and they certainly don't expel him. So that in the last installment that we did, the first 12 chapters of the Quenta Silmarillion, which is the heart of the Silmarillion, really Melkor is just in power for most of that time. And occasionally the other Valar will band together and dislodge him, but then they forgive him and they let him come back to the world. And in the actual heart of the Silmarillion, the actual part called the Quenta Silmarillion, which is a story of the Silmarils, these three gorgeous mesmerizing gems that are created by the High Elves in the glory of the sunshine of their first strength as created beings on Middle-earth. In the first part of the Quenta Silmarillion, we see that contest play out over and over again, first on an epic continent-wide scale with the gods vying directly with each other while mortal beings look on in terror and amazement. But then things settle down in the first 12 books of the Quenta Silmarillion into Melkor just being a super powerful being on Middle-earth, a very territorial, physical, corporeal being who masses a giant army of orcs and balrogs and dragons, and means ill towards the elves, towards the firstborn, the creations of the great music of the Ainur. He means ill towards the Valar as well, but he keeps his head down because he knows that that banded together they can unseat him. Instead, he's just content to wreak evil on the world. And the all-seeing, absolutely perfect ahead-of-time plan of Iluvatar seems to allow that in a way that I don't really understand. If you read the Silmarillion closely, you will see that the plan is mostly terrible. It's mostly doom and gloom for men and elves. In fact, at one point in the 12 books that we're reading today, we're reading the second 12 books. We're finishing out the Quenta Silmarillion, and we'll move on. Our last chapter our last readathon will be the last parts of the book. This finishes the story of the Silmarils, who the Silmarils exert a dire influence over everyone around them. Think of them as the One Ring on steroids, not only over their creator and the Feanor and the sons of Feanor, who consider the Silmarils to be their rightful property, but also over Melkor, who's called Morgoth, and who wants them for himself. And they form a dark heart of every story that's in these final 12 chapters. But it's not just that. It's also that this is the story of an almost unbroken tapestry of war and conflict, all of which we're led to believe is part of the plan of Iluvatar, including the death. At one point in the chapters that we're reading today, we're told explicitly that death is the gift that Iluvatar gives to mortal men. He doesn't give it to elves. He withholds it from them. That's the word that's used. He withholds it from them. They don't die of natural causes. They can be killed. but otherwise they live forever. Whereas mortal men age and die, and that's called a gift. It's an extremely Norse way of looking at things to say that that's a gift, but one way or another. In the first 12 chapters of the Quenta Silmarillion, we get lots of big epic doings, but something I hinted at when we were talking about it last week is that traditionally when I've pushed this book on other people, they find it hard to grab on to something in those first 12 chapters. It seems more like the begats and the thou shalt nots of the more liturgical and less narrative sections of the Old Testament, and I believe it's actually written that way. I think it's written to echo the cadences of the King James Bible in many, many instances. And the thing you have to remember about that, if you encounter it as a block, and you'll encounter King Jamesian descriptions that go on at great length of geography and the nature of kingdoms, and paragraphs that are chock-a-block full of proper names that never recur in the course of the book. And if you encounter something like that and you're not prepared for it, and you've never read the King James Bible, much less know it really well, then you might forget something that's very important, which is that those same dramatic cadences that can make those sections of the King James Bible a bit of a slog also make the narrative, the dramatic sections of the King James Bible absolutely electrifying, more immortal than any other literature in the history of humankind. But there's a reason why we remember Noah's Ark and David and Goliath, and it's not just that it's taught in school. It's also that when you get to those sections of in the King James Bible, you're caught up in them. And whatever problem that might present in the first 12 chapters of the Quenta Silmarillion, that problem is largely gone in the second 12 chapters. The second 12 chapters are full of dramatic incident. They are full of hero stories. It's in these stories that we get the ongoing tale of the hidden city of Gondolin, ringed around by mountains, and its very existence kept a secret because its inhabitants and the people who treasure it know that if Morgoth finds out about it, he'll destroy it. All he needs to do is learn its location to do that. He is still far, far more powerful than any force that could be brought to bear against him. At least so we're often told. And then when push comes to shove, you see that it's sometimes a near-run thing. So it's a little inconsistent, a little maddening in that way. But it's not just the prolonged story of Gondolin. It's also the hero Turin Turambar, who we see his passionate and conflicted story. We see him fight and kill a dragon. Not only a dragon, but the king of dragons, the father of all dragons. And it's a wonderful moment. We see the story of that dragon and the horrible misery that his hypnotic powers inflict. Not just as a being of physical power. He ruins lives with his hypnotic abilities. And we also get in these 12 chapters the story of Beren and Luthien. Probably one of the most touching and involving stories that Tolkien writes in this entire legendarium. About the lovers, Beren and Luthien, and about the doomed quest that Beren is put upon, that in order to win the hand of Luthien, he must capture a Silmaril, all three of which are at that moment lodged in the iron crown of Morgoth, and in the heart of his domain. In other words, an impossible thing for a man to do. Just an impossible quest. The king who imposes it is assuming that it's a death sentence and that it won't even be attempted. But Tolkien has a way I don't think this is an author who writes particularly well about love. But in the story of Beren and Luthien, oh boy, he makes up for his shortcomings anywhere else in all of his collected writings, because this is amazing and amazingly touching. It has a dramatic story. It involves a gigantic wolfhound who can talk. So, of course, it appealed to Steve. And it has a wonderful, touching ending. Just a wonderful, amazing ending that follows a pattern that Tolkien repeats a few times in his stories, where Beren is mortal, but Luthien is not. And when Beren dies, Luthien is given a choice. If we send him back to the world, we can send you back too, but you'll go back as a mortal. And you'll age and die. And you'll have his love. You'll be together again. But then when you're gone, you'll be gone forever. And she, of course, chooses that. And that choice between immortality and mortality we see repeated with variations all throughout Tolkien's writings, including, most famously, the character of Elrond in The Lord of the Rings, whose own brother made a different choice. Elrond chose to be immortal. His brother did not. I don't quite know how that works genetically, but I guess we're not supposed to worry about such things. But in the course of these 12 chapters, we get all of those great stories. And boy, oh boy, rereading it for Octolkien, I was struck all over again as to why, for instance, Tolkien's son Christopher would be splitting these things off into books of their own, and as to why fans would do endless amounts of pastiche fiction about these high points, these dramatic high points. It's because they work. These stories really work. They are the parts of the Silmarillion that contain that particular combination of stateliness and dramatic momentum that you get all through the Two Towers and all through the Return of the King. So you come to the Silmarillion already familiar with what Tolkien can do in that register, but after the first parts of the Silmarillion, you don't expect that you're going to encounter it, and then you do. In these 12 chapters you do, and they're amazing. They're amazingly good. And the 12 chapters are punctuated at fairly regular intervals by enormous battles. Each one of them has its own name. Epic battles that almost always go Morgoth's way, because he has in his stronghold he's constantly at work manufacturing the forces of evil, whereas a point that's made throughout the Quenta Silmarillion is that the forces of good are often fighting amongst themselves, killing each other, conducting long vendettas against each other, constantly in high dudgeon with each other, the elves, the men, the dwarves. No peace between them all. You get the strong impression, as strong as Morgoth is, that if all of the free peoples of Middle-earth had banded together against him in unison, they could have driven him to complete defeat. Instead, they don't ever do that, and one battle after another happens, laying waste to the hopes of the free peoples. Gondolin, of course, in the course of these chapters, is found and sacked, with only a tiny, fugitive, desperate remnant of its inhabitants making its way out. But also, there's one catastrophe in these 12 chapters that we read that isn't actually a battle. It's more of a natural catastrophe. Morgoth causes the mountains that ring his kingdom to spew forth fire unexpectedly. Lava, basically, magma, the pyroclastic flow, and it just carries everything before it. It lays waste to kingdoms and fertile fields, and creates a wasteland that actually has a name. It's given a name. Where is it? It's I never remember Tolkien's the names that he makes for these things. Thereafter, its name was changed, and it was called Angfoglith, the gasping dust. Many charred bones had there their roofless grave. For many of the Noldor, one of the mightiest of all the elf races, perished in that burning, who were caught by the running flame and could not fly to the hills. And that catastrophe drives a high king of the Noldor, Fingolfin, into a surpassing rage, a rage born in part of desperation, that when it seems like everything that he loves has been laid waste. And there's a wonderful passage that I want to read to you. Now news came to Hithlum that Dorthonion was lost, and the sons of Finfern overthrown, and that the sons of Fëanor were driven from their lands. Then Fingolfin beheld, as it seemed to him, the utter ruin of the Noldor, and the defeat beyond the redress of all their houses, and filled with wrath and despair, he mounted upon his great horse and rode forth alone, and none might restrain him. He passed over Dor Nufoglith, the gasping dust, like a wind amid the dust, and all that beheld his onslaught fled in amaze, thinking that Orome, one of the Valar, himself was come, for a great madness of rage was upon him, so that his eyes shone like the eyes of the Valar. Thus he came alone to Angban's gates, the stronghold of Morgoth, and he shouldered his horn and smote once more upon the brazen doors, and challenged Morgoth to come forth to single combat. And Morgoth came. That was the last time in those wars that he passed the doors of his stronghold, and it is said that he took not the challenge willingly. For though his might was the greatest of all things in this world, alone of the Valar he knew fear. But he could not now deny the challenge before the face of his captains, for the rocks rang with the shrill music of Fingolfin's horn, and his voice came keen and clear down into the depths of Angban, and Fingolfin named Morgoth Craven and Lord of Slaves. Therefore Morgoth came, climbing slowly from his subterranean throne, and the rumor of his feet was like thunder underground. And he issued forth clad in black armor, and he stood before the king like a tower, iron-crowned, and his vast shield stood sable unblazoned, cast a shadow over him like a storm cloud. Notice the cadence of and he, very Kim Jamesian. But Fingolfin gleamed beneath it as a star, for his mail was overlaid with silver, and his blue shield was set with crystals, and he drew his sword that glittered like ice. Keep in mind, this is an elf lord, yes, a mighty elf lord, the mightiest of the Noldor, but he's facing a god on the plain in single combat. Then Morgoth hurled aloft Grond, the hammer of the underworld, and swung it down like a bolt of thunder. But Fingolfin sprang aside, and Grond rent a mighty pit in the earth, whence smoke and fire darted. Many times Morgoth essayed to smite him, and each time Fingolfin leaped away, as lightning shoots from under a dark cloud. And he wounded Morgoth with 7 wounds, and 7 times Morgoth gave a cry of anguish, whereat the hosts of Angband fell upon their faces in dismay, and the cries echoed in the Northlands. But at last the king grew weary, and Morgoth bore down his shield upon him. Thrice he was crushed to his knees, and thrice arose again, and bore up his shield and stricken helm. But the earth was all rent and pitted around him, and he stumbled and fell backward before the feet of Morgoth. And Morgoth set his left foot upon his neck, and the weight was like a fallen hill. Yet with his last and desperate stroke, Fingolfin hewed the right foot, and the blood hewed the foot with his sword, and the blood gushed forth black and smoking, and filled the pits of Grond. Notice Morgoth has blood and flesh and feels pain. Thus died Fingolfin, high king of the Noldor, most proud and valiant of the elven kings of old. The orcs made no boast of that duel at the gate, nor do the elves sing of it, for their sorrow is too deep. Yet the tale of it's remembered still, for Thorondor, king of eagles, brought the tidings to Gondolin and to Hithlum far off, and Morgoth took the body of the elven king and broke it, and would have cast it to his wolves, but Thorondor came hasting from his eyrie among the peaks of the mountains nearby, and he stooped upon Morgoth and marred his face. The rushing of the winds of Thorondor was like the noise of the winds of Manwë, another of the Valar, one of Morgoth's dire foes. And he seized the body in his mighty talons, and soaring suddenly above the darts of the orcs, he bore the king away. And he laid him upon a mountain top that looked from the north upon the hidden valley of Gondolin. And Turgon coming built a high cairn over his father. No orc dared ever pass the mountains, to pass over the mount of Fingolfin or draw nigh his tomb, until the doom of Gondolin was come, and the treachery was born among his king. Morgoth went ever halt of 1 foot after that day, and the pain of his wounds could not be healed, and in his face was the scar that Thorondor made. And that's only 1 page in this part of the Quenta Silmarillion, but that is thrilling. Absolutely thrilling. And it's made thrilling in large part by a lot of little narrative choices on Tolkien's part, that he's finding his way in passages like this. Like, for instance, we're told that the people who saw Fingolfin riding out to Angband looked on in amaze, not in amazement. It's an intentional anachronism used to give a kind of heightened grandeur. Same thing with... Same thing with we saw something else. Thorondor, the eagle, comes hasting from his eyrie upon the peaks of the mountain, and stooped upon Morgoth and marred his face. And those are falconing terms, and they are also meant to give a kind of slight otherworldly anachronism to the narrative voice here, and it works. I think it works just wonderfully. And eventually, in the course of these 12 chapters, we get the fate of all 3 Silmarils. One of which in the air, one of which in land, one of which at sea. It's not particularly good fate, especially when one of the Silmarils is hurled into the ocean. You can't, if you're reading the Silmarillion after the Lord of the Rings, which I think most people do, you can't help, when you see that, when you get to that moment, you can't help but remember the Council of Elrond in the Fellowship of the Ring, where people at the council wonder, well, if the One Ring of Power has rolled down the River Anduin to the sea, then why not leave it there? What difference does it make? It's gone from the reach of anyone who could possibly do ill with it. And Gandalf says that seas change, and things change, and it's our duty to make an end of this. not just to make an end in our lifetime, not just to think good enough. We have to destroy it. And no, there's no long-term thinking like that here, but still, once the fates of all three Silmarils are decided, then the Quenta Silmarillion is over. And we get a very doom and gloomy ending. I want to read you. It's beautiful prose. But you have to wonder, what kind of a world is this that the Valar have shaped? What kind of a world is this that Iluvatar has dreamed up? What do we got here? Oh yes, well, at the end of these 12 chapters, Morgoth is finally confronted by the Valar for the last time, and he is banished. He's defeated and banished. He is removed from Arda. Morgoth himself, the Valar thrust through the door of night beyond the walls of the world into the timeless void, and a guard is set forever on those walls, and Arendelle keeps watch upon the ramparts of the sky. Yet the lies that Melkor, the mighty and accursed, Morgoth Barglier, the power and the terror and the hate, sowed in the hearts of elves and men are a seed that does not die and cannot be destroyed. And ever and anon it sprouts anew and will bear dark fruit even unto the latest days. No healing from this evil. No change, even after the birther of that evil has been gone for centuries. Here ends the Silmarillion. If it has passed from the high and the beautiful to darkness and ruin, that was of old the fate of Arda. And if any change shall come and the marring be amended, Manwë and Varda may know, but they have not revealed it, and it is not declared in the dooms of Mandos. So in other words, Arda and the people in it were doomed from the start. That was all part of the Song of the Aenir. It's a little bit of a downer. But then again, those of you who've been reading along with the Quenta Silmarillion, and those of you who watched Lukash's videos on this subject last year, I'll link to them below. They're wonderful, where he walks you through the Silmarillion in much greater detail than I am. Those of you who are reading along are knowing already to expect precious little in the way of happiness. There's precious little happiness in this, precious little levity, precious little victory for the good over the evil. Precious little of that. You can't go into this thing and keep reading it looking for those things because they're not there. And that ends our Octolkien for this time around. We have one more thing to do. We have finished with the Quenta Silmarillion, and we're finished with the story of the Silmarils. But we still have one thing to do. There are two more chapters in the Silmarillion before we're done. So next week, we will do the Akalabeth, which is, 30 pages long? Yes, 30 pages long. And then even shorter than that is a chapter, a remarkable chapter that I will spend most of my time talking about next weekend, called Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. So we'll read those two for next weekend, and then we'll be finished with the Silmarillion. That will finish Octolkien for this time, for this year. And who knows what we'll do next year. I hope more of you will join in. Wouldn't it be great if we had a great chorus of people talking about all kinds of things, Tolkien. But one way or another, we'll meet back here next weekend for that. And in the meantime, I will wrap this up here, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.